Giles Barry, J.B. Richardson, Jr., commonly known as the Big Bopper, was an American musician, songwriter, and disc jockey, whose big rockabilly look, style, voice, and exuberant personality made him an early rock and roll star. He is best known for his 1958 recording of Chantilly Lace. With the success of Chantilly Lace, Richardson took time off from KTRM radio and joined Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and Diane and the Belmonts for a Winter Dance Party tour. On the 11th night of the tour, the musicians played the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. Holly chartered an airplane to fly them to the next show in Moorhead, Minnesota. The musicians had been traveling by bus for over a week, and it had already broken down once. They were tired, they had not been paid yet, and all of their clothes were dirty. With the airplane, Holly could arrive early, do everyone's laundry, and get some rest. The 21-year-old pilot Roger Peterson had agreed to take the singers to Fargo, North Dakota, where the airport serves the cities of Moorhead and Fargo. A snowstorm was inbound, and the pilot was fatigued from the 17-hour workday, but agreed to fly the trip. The musicians packed up their instruments and finalized the flight arrangements. Buddy Holly's bass player, Waylon Jennings, was scheduled to fly on the plane, but gave his seat up to the Big Bopper, who was suffering from influenza. Holly's guitarist, Tommy Alsop, agreed to flip a coin with Ritchie Valens for the remaining seat. Valens won. The three musicians boarded the red and white single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza at the Mason City Airport around 12:30 a.m. on February 3. Snow blew across the runway, but the sky was clear. Peterson received clearance from the control tower, taxied down the runway, and took off. He was never told of two other advisories that warned of an oncoming blizzard ahead. The plane remained airborne only a few minutes. Peterson likely flew directly into the blizzard, lost visual reference, and accidentally flew down instead of up. The four-passenger plane crashed into a cornfield at over 220 miles per hour, flipping over on itself and tossing the passengers into the air. The bodies of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper were jettisoned from the plane, landed yards from the wreckage, and lay there for 10 hours as snowdrifts formed around them. Roger Peterson's body remained in the wreckage. Because of the weather, no one reached the crash site until later in the morning. The airplane registered on the radar of the 789th Air Force radar station located near Omaha for a few sweeps. Long enough for the search radar operator to contact me and notify me of the appearance of the new target. As movements and identification operator, my job was to identify every radar return as friend or foe. I had enough time to realize the blip was moving away from our site, thus it was probably friendly, and before we could set up a track on the board, the blip faded from sight. Some time later, before the crash site was found, we were asked if we had seen it. The last location was given, and in effect, we were the last people to see rock and roll, before they and their music died.
This is the exhumation of the Big Bopper told by a reporter that was there at the exhumation. The exhumation began about 7 a.m. The remains of T.C. Richardson had already been moved to the new site. 2 feet of water had been found at the bottom of the disinterment site, and Dr. Baz stated that we might find nothing but ashes and/or mud if that water had found its way into the casket. When the vault enclosing the casket had finally been raised, it was taken to a special area at the cemetery to be washed off. There was a water line on the vault as the water table in that area was fairly high. Again, we all worried about what we would find. The vault was unlocked at both ends and it cracked open fairly easily, again worrying all of us that water had penetrated the remains. The casket was then lifted out using a crane lift on a piece of machinery. It was then brought into the place where the examination was to take place. The casket color was a dark yellow. In the 1958 photo of it at the funeral home, it seemed to be a bit darker. Because of the shape and ornamentation, it was indeed the correct casket, made by the Batesville Casket Company. Randy Steele, who was present, and I and 4 others were asked to lift the casket out of the hearse and place it on a wheeled apparatus to go to the examining room. We couldn't move it. 2 more came to help and we finally managed to move it. It was that heavy. Jay Richardson had hired a film crew for a medical documentary and my wife, Sharon, and I were asked to take still photos. Another in the room was John Neal, who had known J.P. Richardson since childhood. He watched everything until the time came to open the casket and he left. I believe that, aside from cemetery personnel, about 10 other people were present. We were warned by the cemetery representative about what we might see, that there would be an odor and that the place would be sealed with no one allowed in except who were there. Further, if any of us decided to leave for whatever reason, we would not be allowed back in. With that warning, the casket was unlocked and the lid raised. There were gasps as we saw what was inside. It was J.P. Richardson. The body had been preserved extremely well and was very recognizable. The head seemed a bit smaller than expected because of loss of fluids, and the skin was a bluish-green color. But the hair was very dark brown, almost black with the familiar CREWCUT. It was indeed J.P. Richardson. The skull showed a small crushed spot on the right side of the head and we all assumed that some work had been done at the Iowa funeral home to keep the body looking as best as possible. The upper lip still showed a bit of the makeup used when preparing a body. J.P. had been buried in a dark suit that was still completely intact and there was no evidence of a leopard skin coat in the casket. This was one of my questions. Was he buried in the coat, or with the coat? The answer is no. He wore no shoes, just socks, and the feet were swollen. It was obvious that 2 things took place to keep the body in that state of preservation. The funeral home did an excellent job of embalming, and the casket did an excellent job of keeping the body free from outside contamination such as air or water, etc. May I mention that the odor was nauseating and completely filled the building very quickly. I was told the odor was from the chemicals used to preserve the body intermingling with any body fluids that were still present back then. 2 medical technicians were present, part of the 9 people there, and they began taking a series of X-rays of the body. I was present when those X-rays had been developed and the damage to the body was extensive. Dr. Bass, in his AP report, stated there were massive fractures, but I was not prepared for what I saw. It seemed that every bone had been fractured at least once. Note: Sharon remembers Dr. Bass stating that the fingers on one hand were intact with no fractures. The skull contained 3 large fractures. The right thigh bone was completely separated at the biggest break. I didn't count, but I saw at least 60 to 70 bone fractures in those X-rays. The pelvic area, hips, had extensive fractures, more than Dr. Bass thought was normal. I took him aside and stated that in the crash photos, it appeared that the body of J.P. had been twisted with the lower torso pointing down and the upper torso pointing almost upwards. He looked at the X-ray again and stated that the damage was conclusive to what I had told him. After a brief synopsis of the crash facts, Dr. Bass also concluded that the 3 bodies were ejected from the plane at the moment of impact and tumbled along at that high speed to the place where they rested and were found. After his examination, Dr. Bass looked at Jay and said, "There was no foul play. He did not crawl from the plane. He died of massive fractures." He went on to say that no one could have survived the crash if they had the same damage as that of J.P. They all died instantly. The body was then placed in the new casket, provided by the Batesville Casket Company, and put in the hearse. A small funeral procession went to the new resting place in the cemetery. I was honored to have been a pallbearer during the funeral ceremony when the body was laid to rest for the 2nd time.